Hello, and welcome to today's NITC webinar on first-hand data collection. Students get behind the wheel of vehicle dynamics. My name is Lisa Patterson, and I will be your moderator for today. I am the Tech Transfer and Workforce Development Program Manager for TREC, the Transportation Research and Education Center at Portland State University. TREC houses NITC, the National Institute for Transportation and Communities. NITC is the federally designated National University Transportation Center for Livable Communities and is a Portland State-led partnership with the University of Oregon, Oregon Institute of Technology, University of Utah, University of Arizona, and University of Texas at Arlington. Our webinars are based on original research conducted by faculty, researchers, and students at NITC partner universities. The goal of these webinars is to get useful research results into the hands of practitioners, academics, and other stakeholders. All right, our speakers today are Dr. Roger Lindgren and Jordan Preston from Oregon Tech. Dr. Roger Lindgren is a native of Edmonton, Canada, and has over 20 years of engineering and teaching experience. His research interests include traffic flow theory, intelligent transportation systems, or ITS, microscopic simulation of urban and rural traffic, as well as pavement design and construction. Dr. Lindgren's doctoral research include empirical studies of freeway traffic data in an effort to extend the knowledge and understanding of traffic features in queued and congested flow. Dr. Lindgren joined the faculty at Oregon Tech in 1999 and teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses in transportation engineering, as well as lower division courses in engineering and fundamentals. Jordan Preston is finishing a co-terminal BS-MS in civil engineering with a minor in GIS at Oregon Tech. Her graduate project is a complete streets corridor study that includes design principles from a summer bicycle transportation course in Europe. The development of these instructional modules with smartphone technology was the first of her two NITC research projects. Second, she is on the multi-institutional team with Rethinking Streets for Bikes, assisting in development of a visual, evidence-based book focused on excellent bicycle-oriented street retrofits, which will be completed later this year. Jordan has accepted a position with HLA Engineering and Land Surveying in Yakima, Washington, which is a small private firm specializing in municipal engineering projects, which she will start in July. All right, before diving into the webinar, I'd like to let you know about a couple upcoming webinars and related trainings. On August 9th, Sean Barbeau from the University of South Florida and Derek Friedheim with Movil are presenting on how to overcome barriers to wide-scale adoption of standardized real-time transit information. And on August 30th, we are also hosting a partner webinar with Oregon APA on authentic community engagement with Aaron Key from Metro and Wendy Serrano from TriMet. And lastly, another upcoming event we are hosting is our annual Transportation and Communities Conference. This year, we're trying something a little different. Instead of brief sessions that introduce you to a topic, we'll be offering 16 half-day workshops that will be hands-on and provide deep dive training in a small classroom setting. I've listed a few highlighted workshops that we're offering, but you can also see our full agenda online at our website, which registration is now open. All right, and a brief overview of the webinar. Roger and Jordan will present for about 40 minutes, and during this time, you can submit questions, which will be answered at the end of the webinar. We also will be recording today's webinar, and we'll make it available on our website. You'll receive the video recording and presentation slides in an email following the webinar in the next day or two. And lastly, if you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. Instructions on how to redeem those credits will also be included in your post-webinar email. So during the presentation, you may submit questions by using the questions pane on your control panel. We'll track the questions for Roger and Jordan, and they will respond to them at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, we will send out written responses for any questions left unanswered. All right, and with that, I will hand over the presentation to Roger and Jordan.
All right, well, thank you, Lisa, and looks like my slide is transitioned there properly, so good morning. And again, as Lisa had said, my name is Roger Lindgren. I'm a civil engineering professor at Oregon Institute of Technology, and I've been teaching transportation classes in the US and Canada for about 25 years now. About 19 of those have been at Oregon Tech. And just up front, I wanted to say that photo on the splash screen that shows a someone holding a cell phone and appears to be driving at the same time. Just want you to know that that was a posed photo, a stock photo, and we're not endorsing at all someone to use a smartphone or any other mobile device while they're driving. So we'll talk to you later about exactly what we did for this education project, and I'll let you know that we always had at least 2 students in the vehicles at all times, and that one person, their sole focus was driving the car in a safe and legal manner. So just wanted to clear up any inconsistencies that might be. I'm looking at the attendance list, and I see that there's more than 2 people on the call, so I'm excited about that. I was worried, what if I put on a webinar and no one attended? So unless my parents have registered 18 times, then it looks like we've got some other folks out there. So hi, Mom and Dad. All right, so let's get started here. Let's talk a little bit about NITC and its educational mission. So as Lisa said, NITC, the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, sponsors a wide variety of activities, including research and education projects. So I just thought I'd throw up the screen here that shows about NITC's education projects. So across our 6 campuses, NITC has offered grants in the past and will continue to do so in the future to help our PIs, our faculty at our partner campuses, attract students to transportation. And what we've done with this little project here is try to include both some undergraduate and graduate students in the development of these teaching modules. So we've come up with some modules that are aimed at undergraduate students, but both undergraduate and graduate students were involved in creating those modules. So I think it really helps to meet the mission there that Oregon Tech has. So at Oregon Tech, just a little bit of background for you. We're a small program. We have about 120 students. 110 of those are undergraduate and about 10 students in our graduate program. And one of our graduate students is a co-presenter with me today. Jordan Preston, as Lisa indicated, will soon be graduating from Oregon Tech. And Jordan, would you just introduce yourself briefly to the group?
Hi, I'm Jordan Preston. I got a nice introduction already, so mostly I just want to say that I'm really grateful to NITC for the opportunity to work on these projects. It's been really fun and not too terribly challenging. Not that that doesn't mean the research isn't good, but it really, just the opportunity to work on things outside of the classroom has been a really valuable experience, and definitely honored to work with NITC and put some of these reports and projects together.
All right, thanks, Jordan. And so just to finish off the NITC education program, I've just thrown on the screen here the scope of NITC's program, developing and testing new curriculum and developing some standalone modules, and then looking at attracting and retaining new undergraduate students. And I just wanted to tell you that this was really my motivation for this project. Although we've attempted in this series of teaching modules to be a little bit innovative. We won't claim to be entirely novel. There's other people out there doing similar things, using other types of sensors, and that's wonderful. We welcome all additions to the literature in that area. But what we're really wanting to do was come up with some things that students could get hands-on with. We find that undergraduate students have a wide variety of options available to them when they're studying. In my case, civil engineering, there's a bunch of options available to students kind of at that sophomore, junior level. When they're taking their intro classes, they could go a bunch of different paths. They could be structural engineers or geotechnical engineers. And of course, I would like them to consider studying transportation. And so to have some nice practical, perhaps a little bit exciting, perhaps a little bit high-tech exercises to work on helps us then attract and retain those undergraduate students. So as we look at vehicle dynamics education, I want to give you a little bit of background here. In the past, and I'll admit, when I was teaching braking and deceleration in a variety of classes, a couple of different colleges, it tended to be pretty bland. I would use equations from a textbook. We would occasionally refer those, or not occasionally, we would always make references to the Asheville Green Book. But I found that in that Intro to Transportation class, that students get a little bit bored with just classroom presentations and more equations. They've just come off of 2 years of pre-engineering type education where they're getting hit hard with physics and mechanics classes, chemistry classes. Then they get into a junior level class like Intro to Transportation Engineering, and to just regurgitate physics equations with them on the screen is not terribly dynamic, maybe not a great way to attract them to the field of transportation engineering. So I'm just proposing here that maybe in addition to covering things in that theoretical manner in the classroom, that we could also get out to the field, that we could see some things on the road. So the picture here is just a screenshot actually from a video that we'll show you later of students actually collecting some data. So building that little bit of excitement to augment the theoretical training that they're getting. So let's define excitement, I guess. On the left is my trusty HP 41CX. So when I was going to college, University of Alberta, years ago, studying transportation, probably doing some work in braking and deceleration in my distant past, what was exciting to me is a little bit different than what's exciting to students these days. So I thought it was really exciting to break out my Hewlett-Packard calculator and write a program that would solve that physics equation. Well, now, when I ask a class to do a calculation, at least half of them pull out a smartphone. They may have a calculator, but it's buried in their backpack, and they do a lot of their basic calculations and computations on a smartphone. Well, here's my phone. Well, in fact, the phone I used until a little bit earlier this year. It was a good old flip phone. It did the job for me, but clearly I was not an expert when it came to smartphones. I needed a bit of a technology update, probably for professional and personal reasons. So background, again, telling this story of how this project evolved, which I think is important. A few years ago, spring of 2016, I was teaching a graduate class in geometric design, and we were working through equations like you would typically be doing. We're doing some intersection design at the time. And with these graduate students, I was really trying to encourage them to ask the question why on a regular basis. Why do we use things? We don't want to just look at the Green Book, this policy on geometric design, and simply accept all of the values verbatim. We wanted to have an understanding as to why they were being created. So we would look to source literature, we'd look at original papers. When it came to the Asheville braking equation, which some of you may know uses a deceleration rate of 11.2 feet per second squared for comfortable decelerations, the students started asking those questions. They said, well, why 11.2? First of all, it seems like kind of an arbitrary number. And then what does 11.2 feet per second squared feel like? And then they started asking questions, in the modern era of car design, anti-lock brakes and other features, does that 11.2 feet per second squared really make sense anymore? So it was a good question. They were asking why, and of course we wanted to answer that question. So go to the field. I proposed that we go out to a parking lot and perform some braking tests. I thought we could then use my basic physics equation from the previous slide and then back calculate average deceleration rates. I like going to the field, and it's something that I've tried to incorporate in my engineering classes over the years. And I really credit this man, the late Bill Clues, the traffic engineer at the city of Portland. I met Bill through the ITE Oregon chapter. It was many years ago now. I believe it was very early 2000s. And Bill was, he was a real character. If you know Bill, you would know that when he made a presentation, there was always some humor. There was some interesting graphics involved. when he was talking to students, he had a real way of engaging them and encouraging them to study transportation engineering. And here's a quote, and I credit it to Bill. He made a statement pretty much to this effect. To be outstanding in the field of traffic engineering, you must spend time outstanding in the field. And I really took that to heart. I believed in what he was saying. I believe that traffic is a very tangible thing. Transportation, we can all see vehicles. Most of us are drivers or pedestrians or cyclists, so we've been on the transportation network. So to get students out there standing in the field seemed like a really good thing to me. So it's something that I've tried to do over the years in each of the classes that I've taught. So I just want to say thank you to Bill for encouraging me in that direction. So about this same time when I'm wanting to get students out in the field and getting some deceleration measurements acquired in the car, there were some interesting things happening at Oregon Tech. And I want to credit NITC for this, not necessarily for this screenshot here, but for the project that spawned it. So NITC sponsors research in a variety of transportation areas, and one of them is in bridge design and evaluation. And one of my colleagues, and in fact co-PI in this project, Dr. C.J. Riley, was working on a NITC project, and what he was doing was using the native acceleration sensor that's embedded in Apple iPods to measure accelerations as part of a structural health monitoring program. So what you see in the picture here is an extremely simple bridge. It's just a yardstick spanning between some bricks, and it's loaded up with a series of iPods. And those iPods are acting as an array of sensors. And by loading this little bridge, measuring the responses, the structural folks can get an indication of the health of that bridge. So NITC had sponsored a project wherein Dr. Riley had been doing this work both at the bench scale, and then you'll see here over to the full scale bridge. So he had the students dropping loads on a bridge here in Klamath Falls, and they've expanded this throughout the state actually, and getting an idea of the structural health of the bridge as a result of these decelerations. And I'm not really giving it its full benefit. It's a much more complicated process than I'm describing here. And in fact, Dr. Riley gave a NITC webinar about this research back in May of 2017. And all those webinars are archived on the NITC website. So you can go and have a look at that if you're interested in some different forms of field data collection. So as it often happens in a small civil engineering program like ours, a few of the grad students that were in my geometric design class also happened to be research assistants with CJ and his structural health iPod work. So two students in particular, Sam Lozano and Jason Miller, well, they came up to me with the idea of augmenting our parking lot braking experiment with data that was acquired from iPods or perhaps some other smartphone devices. So don't forget, this was my phone that I was using at the time. So clearly, I'm not an expert in this area. I was not using a smartphone, didn't know about the acceleration chip, but my students did, and they were excited about it. So it looked like a good opportunity to move forward. And really, it's about the same time that my co-presenter today, Jordan, entered the project. So Jordan was enrolled in that geometric design class. And she probably didn't know it at the time, but she would end up spending several months over the next few years working on sensor-based acceleration data. Just wanted to point out that these two students, Sam Lozano and Jason Millar, ended up earning some nice awards here at Oregon Tech for their work with sensors. So here they are pictured with Professor Riley on the left. In the middle is Sam in the upper left, and in the lower right is Jason, and then in each of the pictures is also our university president, Dr. Naganathan. Now I'm going to dive into the work that we did on sensor-based for lateral and longitudinal acceleration. But I want to share with you our first foray into this data collection area. So about the same time that Sam and Jordan and their classmates began playing with iPod sensors, I had been in contact with a previous graduate from Oregon Tech, Eric Leeming, who works with the Oregon DOT. There's a picture of Eric hard at work at his ODOT office up in Salem. So Eric was doing a lot of work with lateral accelerations in relation to highway advisory speeds. In fact, Eric had agreed to come down and provide a guest lecture on these advisory speeds and also work with our students on some lateral acceleration data collection. So this was all kind of happening at the same time. I'd started talking to the students about braking. They'd started researching iPod sensors, and then Eric came to us with his lateral acceleration work. So Eric arranged for ODOT to donate a series of Riker digital inclinometers. You can see them mounted on the dashboard of Jordan's car here. It's basically a digital ball bank indicator, and he helped our students gather data with these digital ball bankers, and then provided us with an Excel workbook for doing some real-time and also post-test data processing. So the ball bank indicator, shown here in this figure, is really just an angular reading that represents the measurement from the vehicle center line. So as a car is navigating a curve, the ball will move off as it is, sorry, I guess I'll take back one. When a vehicle is parked on a level surface, the ball is going to rest at the center. And then as we see here, as the car is negotiating a curve, the ball will start to move up and create an angle. So it's really an indirect lateral acceleration measurement, and it tends to correlate well to actual driver comfort. You can see here that it's taking into account super elevation of the roadway as well. So to assess a curve condition on the highway, a vehicle that's equipped with a ball bank indicator would travel the curve at a series of 5-mile-per-hour intervals, typically starting below the posted speed, below the advisory speed, and then moving up in 5-mile-per-hour intervals. So after each test run, the ball bank value is recorded, and then the advisory speed is defined as the maximum speed for which the ball bank value does not exceed some predetermined threshold. And here you can see those thresholds, and I've listed both the Oregon thresholds as well as the MUTCD suggested thresholds in the 2009 version. You can see that Oregon's thresholds are in line with, but slightly lower than the national thresholds suggested by MUTCD. So from the educational standpoint, we thought it was really important that students be able to feel what these threshold values were like. So going back a screen, this is what you would typically see in a textbook. You'd be introduced to the concept of ball banking. You would see threshold values. But you know, what is 13 degrees? What is 10 degrees? How does that feel on the road? So that's what we're looking for as we wanting to work with these undergraduate students and get that feel. So what Eric did was took a group of our students out in a vehicle, and they traversed several curves on roads near campus here, and they collected data. Now, given that this first group was graduate students, this was a very organic learning experience. We didn't have a curriculum guide. We didn't have pre-programmed notes. We basically got into the vehicle and turned on the computers and did a lot of learning as we progressed. It surprisingly can be complicated getting sensors to work with different brands of laptops, and we learned some lessons there. But at the graduate level, this worked well, this unstructured learning. But while graduate students can be let loose without a lot of significant preparation, I found that undergraduates need a more confined, let's call it a learning space. And so I find that it's helpful for undergraduate students to have a pretty decent grasp of the background, of some of the theory that leads into it before they go to the field. So when Jordan and Sam joined the project, what they did was took what they had done as graduate students and now converted those into a set of introductory lecture notes that would be presented to students in what we call here CE 351. But most universities have, either at the sophomore or junior level, a required introduction to transportation engineering class. So I'm just going to show a few slides here that Jordan and Sam created, and there's a whole slide set that's created, a full set of lecture notes. And in fact, their entire set of lecture notes and full details on all the field exercises are included on the NITC website, and you're more than welcome to use them. After the lecture notes had been prepared, then what Jordan and Sam did was develop a step-by-step process for the students to gather field data. As I've said, for undergraduate students, it was rather organic. They went out, they figured things out on their own, but for the undergraduate students, we wanted this more controlled environment. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan here for a few moments, and she's going to describe to you the basic steps involved in this field exercise.
So on the screen here is looking at the procedures that we came up with after going through some test runs, many test runs. And this particular slide is specific to Oregon Tech and, again, the undergraduate class, although there are sort of graduate level procedures as well that are a little more open-ended. But this undergraduate one, like I said, was developed for the Oregon Tech campus, and so we wanted to maybe not unleash undergraduates all over Klamath Falls to go pick some curves, playing with equipment and maybe testing those advisory speeds a little beyond what they should be. So we looked at the curves on campus, as the image shows. We set it up so that it could be done in a big loop, and they don't have to stop or turn back into traffic, find places to pull off or anything like that. It's just a quick process for them to get in the car once they get set up. So if you go to the next slide, I won't go over all these procedures in detail too heavily, but essentially we provided information on how to set up the equipment in the car. This walks you through connecting the laptop to the ball bank unit that you've set up in the car. And if you keep going, there we talk about how to start, and on the go two more, I think. So yep, there's all the procedures. And once students get the laptop set up and they are in the vehicle, this is the screen that they see. This is the spreadsheet developed by Eric at ODOT, and he was kind enough to let us use it, which was really helpful because he set up all the communication ports and everything like that. So what students do is, as the driver is approaching a curve, all they do is click in the appropriate shaded box. So say that you're working on run 2 for direction number 1, and you're testing at 30 miles per hour, you would just click in that appropriate box, and then you would bring up the next screen, which is on the next slide, and this is what you would see. So students, all they have to do is click begin recording, and then there will be a video showing a little bit later on about how this looks. But essentially, it takes all the information from the curve and puts it into a nice Excel format, and which I think we have on the next slide. Yep. And so it plots it, and students are able to see where they exceed the thresholds, or if they need to adjust the run speed from there. And then I think, yeah, thank you. This is showing only one test run, but it'll, as you do more and more tests, it'll let you know how students, again, should be adjusting and if they should be moving up or down. And again, the procedures sort of ask some questions related to these results and try to encourage some thinking rather than just straight data gathering, using that engineering judgment to come up with some results other than, well, the box is red, so go slower or what not. Those are available. And then just because while we like to play with technology, sometimes it's not always necessarily trustworthy to get your laptop hooked up and connected, and sometimes things just go wrong. So we also developed sort of a semi-manual spreadsheet that students could just print out and take with them on a little clipboard. You can set up the ball bank unit without using a laptop. It has a display on the front of it, and so there's also a set of procedures if you aren't using the spreadsheet as a collection device, where as students go around the curve, after each curve, they're able to press one of the max and min button, and the unit will let them know what just the maximum value was recorded. So it doesn't allow for continuous collection like the spreadsheet does, where you end up with a nice graph of how you traverse the curve, but it does allow students to begin to evaluate how they what those values mean on curves and what it feels like. Again, it was very important that we start putting feelings to numbers, which is something that you don't really get to say in engineering, but that was one of the goals of this project, was just getting students out there and, again, connecting that actual driving experience with the engineering that we are learning in class. So I think on the next slide, there should be a quick little video. It's a pretty simple procedure. So before he starts it, you can see that we were already in the middle of the curve. I had already started the recording. And so it's a little difficult to see, but the ball bank unit should be corresponding to what's on the screen. And then once you reach a tangent, you just end the recording, and it has been collected in the spreadsheet. Again, pretty simple procedure. You can do it without stopping if you have sets of curves in a row like we have on the Oregon Tech campus, or you can drive each curve a couple times, which is what's recommended in the graduate procedures, who might be a little more trustworthy and or knowledgeable, I should say, about how to safely conduct those tests out in the field.
All right, thanks, Jordan.
Yep.
And Jordan and I have reviewed a process for you that, as we said, included using these Riker digital inclinometers. So we were fortunate enough to have ODOT donate those electronic ball bank units to us. But, we can conduct these exercises with very low cost and low tech direct read ball bank indicators as well. So I'm just showing an example here. There are companies that make these and sell them. I found 2 of them yesterday available online and a few used ones on eBay for a very reasonable price. So for less than $100 for a used unit, you can get one of these ball bankers. It's simply mounted on a dashboard, so you can have a little portable setup that is maybe even Velcroed down to student dashes, and you could perform all the basics of this type of test with just some very simple information, simple equipment. And so it doesn't always have to be higher cost and high tech. We can go low tech as well. So then moving on, getting back to my initial desire, which was to deal with longitudinal decelerations. We were looking for a way, and I thought the simplest way to do this was to go out to the field and start from basic physics. So looking at physics, here's the governing equation. This is something that students have derived and used back in their physics classes, generally taken as a prerequisite to the introduction to civil engineering. And it's the practical stopping distance computation. including the A term there for acceleration or deceleration. So knowledge of V1 and V2, and of course if we're stopping, V2 is going to be 0, so this equation is going to become quite easy. So if we go out to the field and we have students accelerate to a fixed speed, we have them brake, get out the rolling wheels there, measure D, back calculate average deceleration. Now, realizing that this is not a precise deceleration, we're not taking into account such things as friction and other things, or Norfolk grade, because we're in a flat parking lot. But it essentially gives the students a field exercise where they can back calculate values, find out what their average deceleration rate was. So that was my goal. Well, my students had some grander thoughts. Sam and Jason said, hey, you know what? These sensors that we'd used back in this bridge project where we were exciting the bridge, measuring the responses, I think we could use those in the car. So they said, let's use smartphones. Well, as it happens in many such projects, it wasn't quite as simple as they thought. So here's just an example of some of the data that was graphed up. It comes in a comma delimited file from the then available smartphone apps. We just used some off-the-shelf apps. We used something called Seismometer, and we also used iSize. And the students gathered basic information when they were decelerating. Well, the first kind of hurdle that they encountered was when they realized that the data files were actually not outputting accelerations. What they were outputting was time rate change of acceleration. So in the physics world, that's known as jerk, and it's not direct acceleration. And you can see this graph here, instantaneous jerk on a variety of time spans over the period in which the vehicle is braking. So it's really hard to discern what's going on there. So after, I won't kid you here, it was a fair bit of learning that had to take place here, but the students eventually came around to understanding how they were going to have to take this data, this time rate change of acceleration data. They're going to have to perform numerical integration on it, and then also do some data smoothing. And so now we have a much more usable data set. So you can see here along the time series, we've got acceleration. It's in feet per second squared. And we can see the point at which the brakes are applied and the deceleration, acceleration goes negative, so we're into deceleration. We can see the point at which the car is stopped. It's reached that equilibrium, zero acceleration. We can identify the maximum rate of deceleration during the test run. And we can also determine the average. So this data set, again, output not directly, but post-processing, and the spreadsheet for smoothing the data as well as the numerical integration was all developed as part of this project, and that's available in our materials that are on the NITC website. So turning this into a learning exercise for undergraduate students, Jordan and Sam then continued the model that they had started with lateral accelerations, and they created a series of lecture notes. They took students through the basics of deceleration, then talked about measurements of deceleration, introduced them to the concept of using a smartphone-based application. And then Jordan and Sam once again developed some step-by-step procedures, and I'll turn it over to Jordan again to take you through the field exercise portion of the braking and stopping deceleration.
So this procedure is hopefully a little bit improved on the graduate learning field exercise where we just went out and sort of figured out on the fly what we needed to do. And as you'll see later on, there's actually a collection sheet where you can see where we made a decision to start collecting a new speed data, which is funny to me that you can just see, oh, look, we decided this is how we can improve the procedure. So the final thing that we have here is On the next slide, you kudos to Sam for his nice drawings, by the way, that describe the procedure. We chose to set up in quite a short parking lot, but if you're implementing this at your school, maybe you have access to some bigger facilities, but make sure that it's a closed course. And we set it up in a loop where a vehicle starts at one end, they accelerate to a set speed, and then we set up some cones, and at that point they begin braking. And the smartphone was collecting data this whole time, so at the end of each run, which I think if you go to the next slide, we'll wait here. At the end of the test run, that data is simply emailed to whoever, the rest of the group, back for processing in the lab after the exercise is over. Something important to note, the spreadsheet that we developed actually takes into account the angle of the phone. So again, the drawing of my car, my dash happens to have a pretty vertical front on it. So we built in a way to calibrate for a theta. So it is set up where the phone should be as close to horizontal as possible, but if you enter a theta, it will take the actual lateral or longitudinal acceleration. So if you continue on, I kind of described the run. Back at the lab, after you have received all the data and simply input it into these spreadsheets, this is all you end up with. You end up with your maximum acceleration, which is what we were trying to test. How do people brake? And on the next one, you can see this is how we decided to do it. We had a driver. Actually, Jason happens to be sitting in the passenger seat, and so he was the one working with the actual apps with the phone mounted on the dash, which you can't quite see. And then, because we were making this up, like I said, as we go, the organic learning process, we were attempting to see if these apps even were giving us what we want. So we did some field data collection as well. Like Dr. Lindgren said, the measuring of the distance it took to stop. We also wanted to use some other equations as well, and so Sam Lozano is in the back seat, and he was attempting as much as possible to get a time of deceleration as well. So he was watching when the brakes were applied and feeling when the car actually came to a full and complete stop. And so we used a couple sets of calculations. Again, the equation that Dr. Lindgren showed earlier, and all this data that we collected. And at one point, as you can see about midway down, we decided to use some of the radar guns that we have in a traffic lab to start collecting actual speed data to see what students were actually driving. So we got, and the level refers to comfortable or emergency braking. And again, that duration was recorded by that third passenger in the car. So all of this we collected with two sets of apps and did some calculations using all of this data that we collected, and we end up with a table of results that Dr. Lindgren will discuss a little bit later. First, we have a video to show you how the procedure actually ends up looking out in our parking lot. So again, accelerate, and at the point where the front of the car or vehicle crosses the plane of the cones, the driver is supposed to stop. As you can see, we mark the distance and then measure back to the cones. We did that a couple times, and off to the side is where students were recording radar values for the actual speed. So other than that, it was a pretty simple procedure.
All right, thanks, Jordan. And here's looking at some results. Remember that this is student-collected data. We know that the AASHTO Green Book suggests that 11.2 feet per second squared is a 90 percentile safe, comfortable deceleration rate. In other words, expecting that 90% of the driving public would be accelerating more quickly than that. So when we look at our data, we find a couple of things. First of all, you see that Jeep Commander, that driver was very aggressive in their braking. Even when we asked them to brake comfortably, they seemed to be unable to really do that. So we had some very high deceleration rates for the Jeep. We also found that in this sort of closed course and monitored environment, it's really hard to recreate all the situations. So you tell someone to brake comfortably, but you're pointing a radar gun at them and you're measuring them and everything. So I think people are pretty tuned in. So most of these deceleration rates are perhaps a little bit higher than what you would see in everyday driving. However, they do bear out pretty close to the AASHTO data. So despite some differences in student definitions of emergency and comfortable, we see that all 5 drivers, at least in this data set, had average rates greater than 11.2 feet per second squared, and this is pretty much what we had expected. I do want to point out, though, that this wasn't a research project. This was an education project. So our sample size and our control of confounding variables wasn't controlled to full scientific standards. Our goal here was to create that learning exercise where students could get a feel for these different deceleration rates. So after we made our way through this little project, just some concluding thoughts. We used commercially available smartphone apps, and we would encourage people to try out some different apps. But remember that each app will have their own unique data and post-processing issues. We also explored using smartphone apps for lateral accelerations. We were thinking perhaps we could replace ball banking, but our initial trials resulted in some very noisy data sets. And in fact, we tried it the other way. We thought that we might be able to use the digital inclinometers to measure longitudinal decelerations. But in speaking to the product engineers at Riker, we found out that the range of the accelerometers in the Riker units were calibrated only to the much lower lateral deceleration rates. So they were not capable of being used for longitudinal. And then in the future, what we would like to do is spend some more time on those lateral accelerations using smartphones, and then also get some computer systems students involved in a project next year to create a custom app that goes directly to the source data coming from the acceleration chip. And then we're hoping that could handle most of the post-processing in real time, ultimately so that the smartphone or iPod would display the deceleration rate and then would be able to display averages directly there on the screen, having all post-processing instead of going back to the lab to do it, have it all done on the smartphone. So some lessons that I learned, and I think some of the students learned. I learned that students like field work. Both undergrad and graduate students liked getting out there and playing in the parking lot. I found it really helpful to have motivated graduate students in our transportation program involved in the project, because they created a buzz where it was easy to get more undergrads to consider transportation for upper division electives. We also found that there was a great opportunity to leverage knowledge across civil subdisciplines. In this particular case, the structural health monitoring translating through to transportation. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that I really love my HP, but I've now given up on my flip phone and moved over to the smartphone. I've got the apps now installed, and I've done a little bit of data collection on my own, so I've learned from my students, and I think that's ultimately what any professor would hope to do, is have a two-way learning street. So I want to thank, in addition to my co-presenter Jordan, I wanted to thank Dr. C.J. Riley, who was a co-PI on the project, and it was his two students that were the sensor guys that really inspired us to do this work. And then I really want to thank all the students in the spring 2016 offering of CE 551 here at Oregon Tech. So hats off to those students shown in the picture there and listed that really helped us out. And I think we're pushing up on our question period time, and so I will turn it over now to Lisa for the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger and Jordan. For those viewing the webinar, please feel free to continue to submit your questions if you have them in the questions pane on your control panel. And just to get started, for the questions, if Jordan, I was curious to some of your takeaways as a student and also being a student leader with the exercise. And then Roger, maybe you could touch on if there's any future steps with this that you plan on doing with the curriculum.
Sure, so I'll let Jordan tackle hers first.
On a very practical note, definitely don't eat beforehand, especially the students that are doing the data collection. Lots and lots of test procedures can make you feel a little nauseous after a while. The undergraduate one shouldn't be too bad, but some of the extended graduate runs were got to be a little wearing. Also, we set it up to where the undergraduate should be paired off for the lateral accelerations, and then two sets of, I guess, partners come together and work on the braking section of the module. So we attempted to design it to where it could be done in a single lab period, but students may be excited and want to continue testing or doing some extra runs. Once you get going, the initial setup can be a little daunting, getting all that technology in your car and connecting all the right wires and everything. But once you get it, the first one set up, it becomes a lot easier each time. So don't be intimidated by the wires and equipment and whatnot. It's not a terrible procedure. It's actually kind of fun.
Yeah, and I guess I would swap on with Jordan's in answering your question, Lisa. Things that we're looking to do in the future. So what I'd really like to do is get some faculty expertise and also student expertise on the app development side. So we approached this as a bunch of civil engineering students and faculty. None of us were app developers at all. So we were simply using off-the-shelf apps and then taking the data as presented and making as best use of it as we could. So clearly, the next step would be to develop an app, first for longitudinal, that would do all the post-processing of the data and would give real-time readings to the students, because I think that would be really meaningful to them to have that app in the car and get real-time readings. The other thing is working again to address some of the issues related to the ball banking and its reliance on the ball banking equipment and the digital inclinometers. If we could get that into the cell phone environment, I think that would be another great step as a learning tool. And then I do want to mention something that Sam Lozano, one of my students, started talking about, and that I have on my whiteboard here as a potential project for a future graduate student, and that is to have the cell phone and its accelerometers used mounted on a bicycle, and now doing some bicycle measurements, not so much on the deceleration acceleration side, but now in measuring pavement roughness. So taking accelerations, in particular vertical accelerations, and translating those into a ride roughness, comparing to some international standards. Because I think on a lot of our bikeways across the country, we have some issues with ride quality, particularly with drainage structures and other things included in the bike lane. And so I'd like to see this work expanded over into the bicycle realm.
Interesting. Great. All right. And we have a question from a viewer wanting to know more about the app, asking how effective and accurate the app was for measuring the safety advisory speed for curves.
Yeah, so we were unable at this point to get good usable data from the app for lateral acceleration. So we relied on the digital inclinometer. So in our case, it was the Riker unit. But as I mentioned, I would also say that doing this manual ball banking with these lower cost items would be effective. As far as the precision on the Riker unit, ODOT had done some studies on it and found them to be highly accurate and had used them in all of their studies. So the equipment we got was second generation. ODOT has moved on to a somewhat more elaborate version, but the units that we used are still in commercial production and can be used for that purpose. But yeah, I'd really like to get the lateral accelerations done onto the app as well. On the accuracy side for the longitudinal, by using multiple different apps and then comparing them to our ground-based, we had some reasonable correlations, although I wouldn't call them perfect correlations between our direct field measurements of speed and distance and comparing those to the app's longitudinal deceleration. So a good reasonable accuracy, but I can't say that it was great accuracy at this point.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Roger and Jordan. We don't have any more questions from the audience at this time, but feel free for those viewing to send us any questions if you have them later. You'll also receive a post-webinar email from us with the slides and video. And I guess I'll just leave it up to Roger and Jordan if you have any last takeaways that you want to share, or otherwise we can go ahead and end the webinar a few minutes early.
Well, I'll just put in a plug. I want to thank NITC and the USDOT through the UTC program for making this kind of thing possible. It truly does inspire students to study transportation when they see projects like this taking place on campus. I know NITC has been a great addition to our campus, and I think the UTC programs throughout the country benefit from this type of thing, be it research, be it education projects alike. So big shout out to the whole University Transportation Center program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. This does conclude our webinar, and you can view our other professional development offerings on our website at nitc.track.pdx.edu. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.